Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. We are ready to get started with the webinar Boards and Superintendents Strategies for Creating a Strong Partnership. This webinar will last 1 hour and will conclude at 12:30 p.m. We encourage you to send your questions into the Q&A box, and we will address those questions throughout the webinar. This session will be recorded and shared with a link to the recording along with the slides, and those will be emailed after the webinar. Today, we're delighted to have Heather Dean, Chief Operating Officer of NSBA, on the line with us today. Heather, welcome, and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Amanda. NSBA is excited to offer this national webinar in collaboration with the team at Board Docs. We're hoping that today's discussion will provide you with some valuable takeaways and new perspectives. We encourage you to reach out to your state association for further information and/or formal training on this topic. At the end of the session, you'll have an opportunity to complete a short evaluation of the webinar. Please take a moment to share your feedback, as we hope to offer more programs like these, and we really want to know what you think. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's session, Dottie Schindlinger. Dottie is Board Docs and Diligent Corporation's Governance Technology Evangelist. She's been working in the area of board governance in a variety of roles and industries for the past 20 years. In her role, Dottie provides thought leadership on the intersection of good governance and technology through dozens of articles, webinars, and conference presentations globally each year. Dottie?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Heather and Amanda, and it's really nice to be here with you this morning. I'm really excited about this panel that we have lined up for today to talk about the strategic partnership between boards and superintendents at schools. But before I get into that, I want to just really briefly give a shout out and a special thank you to NSBA for inviting Board Docs to sponsor this webinar and to work in collaboration to highlight the important role of the state school board associations and also of individual school boards and of superintendents in helping to ensure that students in our country have a top quality education and excellent outcomes. Board Docs is a board management solution. It's software that is designed to help facilitate and streamline the work of school boards and the boards of state and local government. If you'd like to learn more about Board Docs, we'd invite you to do so by visiting boarddocs.com. But the purpose of today is not to really spend time talking about the software. Instead, what we're going to be talking about with our panelists is this issue of the strategic partnership that should really exist in a really productive and mutually supportive fashion between boards and superintendents. And we're going to be talking about that full spectrum of board-superintendent relationships, from when boards have to identify potential candidates to serve as a superintendent, to going through the executive search and hiring process, to going through the ongoing support and retention process, and to the evaluation process. We're going to touch on really all of those different topics. And throughout today's session, we'd really like to hear from you. As my colleague Amanda mentioned, we're going to keep all the phone lines muted so that the recording will have a good audio quality. But we'd very much like to hear your questions. And so the best way to participate in the roundtable discussion is going to be to send your questions through the QA box on the GoToWebinar control panel. Just put those right into the QA box. I will see those come across the screen, and at various times throughout today's conversation, I'll be opening it up to questions from the audience, and we'll have an opportunity to pose your questions to our panel. So just to provide a little bit of context for today's topic before I introduce our panelists, one of the reasons that we felt that this would be a very important topic for us to talk a bit about is that in the work that NSBA does, really kind of serving in a leadership capacity of all the different state school board associations, we know that the state school board associations are extremely busy in the areas of doing executive search for superintendent roles, and also in providing direct consulting services and supportive services both to boards as well as to superintendents throughout this process. And it's an incredibly important part of the board's job. The school board really only has one employee, the superintendent. And through that employee, they really need to have a clear picture of what's happening at the school, what are some of the challenges facing the community in the school, what are some of the needs that are coming down the pike, and ways to grow and evolve the school to make sure that it's really meeting its mission. And boards really are responsible to do that full process, to recruit, to hire, evaluate, support, and oversee the superintendent. And so getting that kind of support from the State School Board Association can be absolutely critical. But we also really want to focus some time today on talking about how this strategic partnership between the superintendent and the school board can be developed, and how it can be developed in such a way that there's a very healthy dynamic and a sort of an atmosphere of mutual respect and support. And really, one of the key hallmarks of that is that the superintendent and the board both really keep in the forefront of their sights that student well-being and achievement is the most important thing that they're trying to do together. So we're going to talk a bit about that. In terms of how the board is performing this function, obviously one of the key components of this is thinking about the succession plan. Now, sometimes that succession plan is something that superintendents will bring to the table for discussion, because it may very well be that that person has been hired in a particular context to come in and maybe do a turnaround or to meet some specific objectives. And so there's an understanding that that superintendent is going to be there for a specific period of time until those objectives are completed, and then move on to maybe another similar type of a role. But sometimes, the board is really looking for a superintendent that will come on board and stay for as long as possible. What we know is that the national data about average superintendent tenure is really not that great. There's really kind of an average tenure of a little bit more than 3 years, which if you compare that across some of the other industries, and maybe a good analogy would be to compare that to the average tenure of chief executives of nonprofit organizations. Now, nonprofits may be another outlier at the other extreme, but the average tenure of nonprofit executives is about 12 years. So that's a pretty big delta between 3 years and 12 years. And so it's interesting to sort of dive into what are some of the factors that go into that difference. In some cases, as I mentioned, that might be intentional. The superintendent might be hired for a specific set of purposes. But in other cases, it's because there is a bit of a challenge going on between school boards and superintendents that may be creating a really challenging dynamic. And so we want to spend some time kind of talking about that and taking a look a little bit more deeply at that. When there is a healthy CEO and board relationship in place, and we say CEO and board relationship here in just kind of a general context, based on the data that has been collected, there's a lot more data that exists in terms of this kind of a relationship across multiple industries. If you just think chief executive equals superintendent, you can kind of see how this data might apply in the school board world. But again, as I mentioned, there's quite a big difference between the average tenure for superintendents versus the average tenure for other executives in other industries. And one thing that we certainly know is that high turnover has a really detrimental impact on the trust between the board and the community. If and when that turnover has not been intentionally communicated to the community, meaning this is the board's intention, we want someone to come in for X period of time to complete Y objectives. If it's just a matter of they bring in a candidate and that candidate doesn't stay, or that candidate is asked to leave for any reason, and that happens repeatedly, it can create sort of a feeling in the community that the board is maybe not doing the right things in terms of hiring, retaining, evaluating, supporting the superintendent. There's also a bit of national data that I think is kind of interesting in this context, which is that when a top executive leaves, so when someone leaves and it's not intentional and it's something that people were not planning for, another average of 4 additional leaders will walk out the door with that top executive within 1 year of the chief executive's departure. And there's also some data that calculates what's the cost to replace a top executive. And this data is based on looking at top executives that make a salary of at least $100,000 a year. They calculate that the cost to replace that top executive when they leave unexpectedly is up to 6x the annual salary that person receives. So those are some pretty interesting statistics for us to kind of chew on as we get a little bit more into this conversation. We also know from some of the data that's been collected specifically in the school board market that most schools report that they don't have a specific succession plan in place. There's a lot of reasons for that, and we'll be interested to talk a bit about why that might be. But it is a bit of a concern. If there's no succession plan in place, many things could happen. You don't always have control over what happens. There could be an unexpected life event. There could be really any number of things that might happen that might require an unexpected departure of a superintendent. And if there's not a succession plan in place, that can really put the school district at risk. In a survey that was conducted a couple years ago by the American School Board Journal, 85% of the superintendents that were asked said that they don't believe there are enough candidates to fill the jobs that are going to be coming open due to retirements in the coming 5 to 10 years. So that's a pretty high number for superintendents to say, you know what, we really don't know how they're going to fill these jobs. There's not going to really be enough candidates, and we don't see the pipeline being created. And again, I think that raises a lot more questions than it answers, but it's something interesting for us to kind of chew on and talk about as we go through this conversation today. And then finally, I want to just put forward an idea that is certainly true in many other industries. We're seeing that this discussion around succession planning across multiple industries is sometimes something that both boards and chief executives are reluctant to bring up with one another, and yet they both share concerns about it. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic. In the case of the board, they might be concerned that if they raise this as a topic of conversation with the chief executive, it might kind of scare the chief executive into thinking a change is imminent. And on the flip side, the chief executive might kind of have the same concern that if they raise it to the board might think that that person's either getting ready to retire or looking for another job. And I think one of the things that, certainly state school board associations and others that, do this kind of work can help organizations do is bridge that gap and meet in the middle and say, no, we actually really think this is an important topic for you to talk about. It's responsible for you to talk about it, and make a safe space where the conversation can happen without either party, sort of having that deep fear that something is imminent. So what I'd like to do now is introduce our panelists. And I'm going to take a minute here and just give you a little bit of background about them. And then we're going to talk about this from all these different angles. We will certainly be talking about the role of the state school board associations in executive search, recruitment services, consulting that they can do on an ongoing basis, evaluation services, and more. We're also going to look at this from the perspective of a board member who has had a couple of executive searches in the last few years and can talk about the process from the board's perspective. And then we're also going to be looking at this from the perspective of a superintendent who has served in different school districts, often with a specific mandate to come in and complete specific objectives and then move on to the next adventure. So we're going to look at it from those three different perspectives, and hopefully then those of you that are joining the webinar will have additional perspectives that you can share with us as well. But let me take a moment and introduce our panelists. So just to do this in alphabetical order, no better choice here. So we're joined by Andrea Messina, who is the Executive Director of the Florida School Board Association, and she leads all aspects of the statewide professional organization for Florida's elected school board members. The association offers a wide array of services and programs to Florida school boards, including superintendent searches, executive coaching, board training, and consulting on a variety of leadership issues. Ms. Messina takes an active role in superintendent searches and executive development and has led 6 successful superintendent searches in the past 2 years. A former English teacher, Charlotte County School Board member, and FSBA Professional Development Coordinator, she brings a multifaceted perspective to her leadership role. Prior to becoming the Executive Director in 2015, Ms. Messina served as FSBA's Director of Board Development and was the go-to person in Florida on the issue of school board and superintendent relations, providing coaching and leadership support to district governance teams and their members. And Ms. Messina is a proud alumna of the University of Central Florida. Andrea, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm also going to then introduce briefly our other 2 panelists, and then I'm going to turn the conversation over to Andrea. So our next panelist is Beverly Slough. Beverly Slough is District 1 representative on the St. Johns County School Board in Florida, and she was first elected as a school board member in 2002 to one of Florida's highest performing counties. Her passion for serving on the board is focused on ensuring a quality education for every child in St. Johns County. And through her service as a board member of the Florida School Boards Association, every child in Florida. She's held almost every office on the association board, including president. And as past president of the Florida School Board Association, Ms. Slough was an active advocate for excellence in education, both in Florida and nationally. Ms. Slough was very active in her local community, including serving on the boards of United Way Florida, United Way of St. John's, Compass Florida, Investing in Kids, and she serves as vice chairman of Florida School Board's Insurance Trust. She holds a bachelor's degree in biology from Stephen F. Austin State University. We're also joined today by Dr. Deborah Wortham. Dr. Deborah Wortham joined the East Ramapo Central School District in Spring Valley, New York as superintendent in the fall of 2015. Dr. Wortham is internationally recognized as an educator, author, and speaker, and is best known for her work turning around school districts with multiple challenges, something she's done successfully more than once in the course of her career, a few times. She's a native of Chicago, Illinois, and Dr. Wortham was the first locally elected superintendent of the Roosevelt Union Free School District in 11 years. The district has been removed from school improvement and rated in good standing. Dr. Wortham has been featured throughout the country speaking on selected topics such as improving student achievement through the implementation of the principles of efficacy and effective school board leadership development. In addition to her work, Dr. Wortham is highly engaged in civic and community programs, including serving as a member of the organizations including Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, Links Incorporated, Rotary International, and Lions Club. Dr. Wortham received her doctorate in educational leadership from Nova Southeastern University, her master's in reading from Morgan State University, and her bachelor's in elementary education from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. Panelists, thank you so much for joining me, and I'm going to be turning this over to Andrea. And so, Andrea, if you would take the next couple of slides here and give us a little bit of context for the work that you do at the Florida School Boards Association, we would appreciate that. Andrea? So, Andrea, I don't think that I can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. And the first point I wanted to make was that there was a slide a few slides ago that said school districts, school boards only have one employee. And I just wanted to point out that in some states, it is possible for school boards to have more than one employee. So as we have school board members from across the country and superintendents from across the country, I just wanted to mention that they would want to check their local state statute. I know here in Florida, school boards can also employ an attorney, and if they choose to, an internal auditor. So I just wanted to clarify that in case there was some people listening who have more than one employee. But for purposes of this conversation, we're obviously talking about the chief executive. And as a school board member, and also in some districts across the country, there are some superintendents who are elected. And Florida has the largest number of them, but there are some other states that have some elected superintendents. So the relationship between the board and the superintendent doesn't change whether the superintendent's appointed or elected, but 98% across the country are appointed. And that's where my work with the Florida School Boards Association executive search has come in to play. I will tell you that with regard to the relationship between a board and its superintendent, both we in the Florida School Boards Association and all of the other school board associations across this country, every state has one, recognize that the most important relationship in a school district, if a district is going to focus on student achievement, is the relationship of the governance team, which is the board and the superintendent. And as long as that relationship has open lines of communication, things are transparent and respectful, that's really what's going to help focus the district on student achievement. It's when communication lines break down that we start to see sort of a loss of focus on student achievement, and typically that's when the need to do a superintendent search may arise quicker than maybe board members and or the superintendent would have originally intended. So focusing on that trust relationship helps keep a district moving forward, and also there's research out of Iowa that would support that. Again, you mentioned this before, each state school board association has training and development programs that they've specifically targeted to the boards in their state, which can help boards work on their governance relationship. But when a superintendent search is necessary, again, the State School Boards Association has the service that they can help provide whatever executive search a board might need, and the support that can help facilitate a smooth transition from a retiring superintendent or an exiting superintendent into a newly hired superintendent, making sure that that superintendent is set up for success.
That's great. Thank you so much, Andrea. I think that's really helpful context. And certainly, as you point out, of course, you know, there may be more than one employee that the board has direct, you know, oversight of. But generally speaking, the top executive of an organization, you know, whether that's a school board or a nonprofit or any other organization, would be the person to whom the staff would report. And generally speaking, the staff doesn't typically report en masse to the board, right? So there may just be a handful of people that the board is directly responsible for overseeing. And of course, the board is responsible for the health and well-being of the institution as a whole. But that's an important clarification. Thank you for that. I think that's really helpful to put that forward. So next, what I'd like to do is invite Beverly Slough to give a little bit of commentary about her background and her context and sort of the context she's bringing to today's conversation. Beverly, are you there?
I am. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be able to participate in this webinar and to bring the insight of a school board member to the table. When I was first elected in 2002, immediately the superintendent informed the board that he would be leaving. And I don't know if that was because of a change in composition of the board or what, but we were immediately faced with hiring a new superintendent, and 3 of us were brand new to the board. So it was an interesting dynamic at the time. Our district is the fastest growing in Florida, and it is has been #1 academically achieving for the for the previous 9 years running. And so we in 2002, when I was elected, we were kind of in a mediocre kind of a place as far as achievement was concerned, and certainly we were not nearly so large as we are now. So we were facing a lot of challenges because we were shifting. We took advantage of the expertise of the Florida School Boards Association to help us in our search, and it was very, very beneficial to us, especially since the majority of the board were novices in the process. The School Board Association helped us create a matrix to evaluate the candidates that we had, and helped us to do a nationwide search in order to accomplish the goal of finding someone who would come to St. Johns County and be a transformative leader that can take us from mediocrity to excellence. That superintendent, we were very fortunate. Dr. Joseph Joyner was who we hired, and he stayed with us for 12 years and did, in fact, take us from mediocrity to excellence. And that attracted many, many people to our district, and we began to grow exponentially. Last year, Dr. Joyner retired, and again, we turned to the Florida School Boards Association to help us with a nationwide search to replace him and allow us to select a leader who would help us to stay on the traction that we had achieved over the past 12 years. As it worked out, we hired an internal candidate, but we didn't have any expectation that we would do that. But the expertise of the School Boards Association really helped us to hire the superintendent and to continue the quality of the team that we have, the governance team we have.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And so thank you so much for joining the panel, Beverly. I think you are going to bring such a great perspective to the conversation today, having had that experience on the board. So next, what I'd like to do is to ask Dr. Deborah Wortham to give a little bit of context, if you would, on your experience as a superintendent. Dr. Wortham?
Good morning and greetings from the East Ramapo Central School District. Our topic today, boards and superintendents, strategies for creating a strategic partnership, is a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. I do believe that a strong board and superintendent partnership is actually the key to the success of every student in the district. I really believe that the role of the superintendent is and I'll phrase it as such by saying, the care and feeding of the board. And to obtain this success, the board and superintendent must focus on the mission and the vision of the district. The mission statement must be clear, and it must be embraced by the board, by the superintendent, by the professional learning community. The mission statement, I do believe, that should respond to 3 questions, and this has helped me in my superintendency. This is my 4th one, and it has helped me with my relationship with the board. So the 3 questions then: what is it that we want to do? How do we know that we're doing it? And what will we do to guarantee success? And as I said, in each of the 4 districts where I've had the privilege to serve as the superintendent, the mission statement was key. And working with the board in this school district in East Ramapo and 300 staff and community members, we created a mission statement that really serves the district and the relationship building quite well. It creates a strong partnership. And our mission statement, I'm so happy to share with you. As a unified community, the East Ramapo Central School District is committed to educating the whole child by providing a healthy, safe, supportive, engaging, and challenging learning environment. This mission statement is recited every day by students and staff. It's recited by the board every board meeting. In our vision, we will be proficient in all that we do. So actually focusing on the mission and the vision of the district keeps everyone on one accord. Every component of the mission statement is significant. For instance, the first phrase of our mission statement says, as a unified community. And that was my challenge when I arrived in this district. We strive and work hard towards achieving unity in everything that we do. And this is we're experiencing a tremendous shift in our district. So in essence, the board governs, the superintendent administers, and together we form the school district's leadership team.
Thank you so much. And I was just noticing, Dr. Wortham, when you were talking about the mission statement, that the logo that you have actually has the phrases from the mission statement in the logo around the circle. So that's just wonderful. And I love that your mission statement is something everyone can remember and recite. That is really terrific. So I don't think that happens often enough. Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to actually start our roundtable conversation with a question back to you, if that's okay. I wanted to ask you in particular about some of the data that we shared at the introduction about superintendent turnover, and that basically the research is showing the average length of tenure for superintendents is just a little bit more than 3 years. Versus an average of 8 years in the corporate sector and an average of 12 years in the nonprofit sector. And since you're someone who served as a superintendent at 4 different school districts, I wanted to know your thoughts about that data and whether you thought there might be some specific factors that go into that result. What are your thoughts about that?
Actually, I've had the privilege of serving as the superintendent of 4 districts. When I first became a superintendent in 2008, I thought that was going to be my one and only district. I never thought at this point in my career that I would have the privilege of saying that actually I've served in 4 districts as the CEO. But you know what? I have to say that each district actually had my name on it. And by that I mean each district was identified as a low-performing district. That type of work is absolutely in my heart. And working to transform districts, I know that is my destiny. I know that it's absolutely my calling. And it is almost like Chateaubriand, that it's in my heart. I thrive on working with districts that need that kind of support. So as I began my tenure in each district, I identify and I invite cabinet members to walk closely with me, walk closely together, and be a part of the journey in transforming the district. In every district where I have served, because of the level of achievement, we had been assigned a state monitor. So this is not the kind of work that you can do if in isolation. This is a collaborative work, and it's really quite rewarding to see your students grow and develop. And because of this work, we have to create a legacy for continuing the work of school improvement. And it's very unique. It's, as I said before, it's collaborative and it's collective for each district. So I go into and have gone into each district. First cabinet meeting, who will sit in my seat next? And my goal in life is to create leaders. As we analyze and inspect the work that has to be done, then we teach we create that succession plan with the goal of who is going to carry on the work. In every district where I've served, they never had to have a search firm, sorry guys, never had to have a search firm to select the next superintendent, because we all worked with, maybe it's your skill set that will lead this district in my absence. So it is a collaborative work, very sophisticated, willful, and intentional kind of work to create an environment where the next leader is sitting among us.
Thank you so much. And I think it's such an interesting perspective. And I think if I'm on the phone and I'm someone who's sitting on a school board, I'm wondering how we can get you for our next gig. but at any rate, I'd like to ask Andrew Messina to chime in from the State School Board Association perspective, because I know, Andrew, you've worked with many school boards that are at different parts of this process, and maybe a school board did not have the benefit of having a superintendent that was as thoughtful about succession planning, and they need to do a lot of work. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts about what Dr. Wortham shared, and then also if you could talk a little bit about how you help a school board really get to a level of readiness to embark on a superintendent search. What are the things that really kind of need to be in place to make sure they've got a good and successful succession plan in place?
Okay, well, first off, I did want to comment on what Dr. Wortham said, because she brought up a really salient point, and that is she felt that the districts she went to, I know she mentioned Chateaubriand, she felt those districts, she felt that she was the right fit for that district. And it is important to note that what a district needs today, if they're doing a search, is going to be very different from what they need in 2, 5, or 10 years. Ms. Slough from St. Johns County mentioned that 10 years ago, they were looking for a very specific superintendent to bring about a certain kind of change, but then this time around, when they did the search, they hired an internal candidate. So sometimes the person that a district is looking for might be someone who has to get a financial house in order, if that's what the district's current greatest need might be. Sometimes it might be to get community support for a referendum, if that's what the district's case situation may be, or priority. And sometimes it's for turnaround and improvement, which is what Dr. Wortham had mentioned. So not all superintendents have the same resume, and there might be a time when a turnaround and improvement person is the exact superintendent you need, but you may also have a time when a financial expert is the person that you need. So really, to go directly to your question about how do you help a board get to a level of readiness to embark, one of the first things the board has to do is determine exactly what they want in their next district chief executive. Now, to do that, most of the state associations with which I am familiar encourage the board to have conversations with their community, because if you're going to have board members who reflect their community and who are engaged with their community, finding out what the community believes is needed in the next superintendent is an important part of the conversation. But the board has to sit down and have some open and honest conversations about what it is that they need, what it is that they're looking for. Additionally, one of the things that we've noticed in recent years is that the superintendent search process is actually a process of mutual selection. So while a board is interviewing superintendent candidates are also interviewing boards, because these days, as you saw on one of your slides, there aren't enough candidates for all the positions that are going to be open. So the good superintendent candidates will get to select what type of board, what type of community they want to work with. So one of the first things we ask boards to do if they're looking at a retiring superintendent, or if they know that they're seeking a superintendent through some other opening, the opening arose through some other avenue, is to really look at the interactions that the board is having at their board meetings, and that the board is having with their current leadership. Because if there's internal fighting on a board or between the board and the superintendent, and candidates these days are very savvy, so they are going to do research, they're going to watch board meetings, they're going to watch workshops, they're going to read newspaper articles. And if the headlines are that the board is divided, that the board has lost focus, that student achievement isn't the main topic of conversation, that's going to deter some of the best candidates. So part of a readiness to embark on a superintendent search is for the board to make sure that they all are acting professionally, and that they all have a shared, we're going to go back to again what Dr. Wortham said, which is the mission, the vision, those sorts of things are all shared, and that they are all working towards common goals.
That's great, thank you. And I think that it sounds like you're both very much in agreement. And so what I'd like to do is ask Ms. Lau to chime in from the board perspective. And so Ms. Lau, you, as a board member that's been through this process a couple of times really in just the last few years, I think you're hearing both Ms. Messina and Dr. Wortham talk about these issues of fit and timing, right? That it's a matter of both the candidate and the school board determining what the right fit will be on both sides, and then also understanding what's the appropriate type of candidate for a specific time, for a specific moment in time for the school district. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about, first of all, whether you agree with that, but then also what happens when you have a person in that position that you feel is really just not the right fit? Either they were the right fit at some point, but things have changed, or something else has happened and it's really kind of come to light that this is just not the person in the right fit, and how do you kind of take action on that? So I'd love to hear your thoughts about those issues.
Well, first of all, I agree with the other participants here about the necessity for that right fit. I think it's very, very important for, first of all, the board to be cohesive and not to have varying points of view in regard. We need to come together as a board with a singular focus on what we're looking for in a new leader, academic leader for our districts. I think, too, that both my colleagues are correct that it's a mutual selection process, because if a superintendent candidate doesn't feel comfortable and feel that he or she is able to work with the board, I think it sets up a culture of failure from the beginning. So I think it's very wise that a candidate for superintendency pays close attention to the dynamics of the board, how it works together, how it supports one another, if there are any conflicts going on. And now, in regard to your particular question about if it looks like that a change needs to happen, I think honest, open conversation is so important. If I were to be unhappy with my superintendent, I don't think I should ever blindside him by coming to the table and saying, I'd like to make a motion to dismiss the superintendent. I think if I have a conflict with the superintendent, that should be shared openly with him. And if others of my colleagues share that opinion, that maybe in Florida it would have to be done in public because we have very stringent and strict sunshine laws. But the group of us should express our concerns to that person and give him a chance to meet our expectations. But if it looks like that there's going to be a breach and there's not going to be a way to remediate the team, I think the first thing that the board needs to do is to decide what direction that we want to seek going forward, and analyze what the problems are, and understand the type of leader that we need to help us overcome those problems and go on to greater success for our children.
I think that's really relevant. Thank you so much for that. And so, Dr. Wortham, I want to come back to you for a moment because I know that you mentioned in your introduction your experience kind of going into school districts that had, specific challenges in terms of, they have a state monitor in place, maybe they have, failing performance, and they need a really sustained effort to focus on mission and turn the school around. And I wonder if you could share with us a little bit of experience on your approach to really ensuring that the board is up to speed with the idea that you're there for a specific set of reasons, and that there will be, a new person coming in at some point to pick up the ball from there and run with it. So I would imagine that in some cases the board might kind of fall in love with you and really not want you to ever leave. And so how do you kind of approach this conversation with the board around succession planning and how to make sure they know kind of what the plan is?
Well, I actually, when I am selected to serve as the superintendent, I really don't have an exit date unless I just don't have an exit date. Let me just put it in that perspective. The succession planning component, or let me just say, in this district, East Ramapo Central School District, I read about this district. Believe it or not, it came up on my iPad as an alert, and I read about it, I think 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and then I was led to videos, just as you said earlier. I researched this district, and I thought, oh my goodness, that really is the kind of work that I really like to do. And I don't know whether it was a month, 6 months, I don't remember how long it was, but then there was an advertisement for this district. And I actually started crying because I knew that this is where I wanted to be. So coming here, I came here as an interim superintendent, November 4th of 2015. Interim superintendent. I interviewed with so many people, and they said, you realize this is an interim position and you will be out of a job in June. And I said, I clearly understand, but I also knew the commitment to do this work. And so we started the work, and I applied when the search firm, when they launched the search, I applied, and July 1, I started my tenure, July 1 of 2016. But this nugget also reigns deep in my heart. I realize that I am an external to the district. I haven't been here for 20 years, let's say. And one thing I learned when I worked on my doctorate is that when the superintendent is an outsider, the next superintendent will be hired internally. And when you understand that, and you understand the rotation and then the succession, then that compels superintendents to ready your heart and your mind and have these discussions with the board, knowing that cycle. And it's not, and I gotcha, it is something, whether you think about the rotation or not. If you think about it now that I'm raising the point, then you'll see that the rotation was internal and then external. So in every district, one district I entered, and the board clearly said, these are the goals that we need you to accomplish. And my conversation with them was, I see talent on the cabinet, so therefore, let's consider someone internally. And I worked with each person on the cabinet to develop the skill set that the board needed to take on or to move the district forward. And it's just a matter of being open and honest and having those courageous conversations. Once you conduct feasibility studies, you conduct desk audits, and you make systemic changes, the last thing that you want to do is to throw the district in another direction by changing the mission statement, the vision statement, because of a new superintendent coming on board. To me, in my mind, I consider that to be fraud. Every superintendent wants to brand their tenure and market academic success, but we must celebrate continuing the legacy of great work through multiple leaders.
Thank you so much. I think it's really just a kind of an inspiring story, quite frankly. And so we have a lot of questions coming in from our audience. Thank you so much, those of you who sent in questions. We will certainly try to get to as many of these as we can, although we are going to make sure that we end on time, just as we started on time. But what I'd like to invite the panel to maybe consider with me is that for those questions that we don't get a chance to answer today on this webinar, maybe we can collaborate to provide some feedback on some of these questions in writing to those that we don't get a chance to address. So we'll see if we can't do that together as a follow-up. But in the meantime, I want to come back to Andrew Messina. Ms. Messina, can you talk a little bit about, let's talk a little bit more tactically. I think we've been talking, having really rich conversation actually about some of the philosophies and the approaches and the strategies around, executive succession planning and search and, ensuring that good partnership. I wonder if you could bring it down to a little bit more tactical level and talk about some of the tools and best practices that you recommend to school districts that you work with when it comes to things like, finding the right next candidate and creating the succession plan. What works? What do they use? What technology, what tools, what best practices?
Okay, well, let's start with the succession plan part, because ideally, if you do that well, then the search kind of takes care of itself. So the first thing I would say is that a school district has to be intentional about creating a culture of investing in the capacity of leaders. And they do that in any number of ways, but especially as setting the expectation from day one with a newly hired superintendent by asking very specifically for that new superintendent right from the start to develop a succession plan. That should be one of the expectations of any superintendent coming in. And a superintendent can do that in any number of ways, as Dr. Wortham has explained, but a succession plan doesn't mean that I'm expecting to have somebody available tomorrow to walk in the door. It could be a 2, a 5, a 7-year plan where the superintendent exposes people who are in positions of leadership to different opportunities to round out their own development so that they're a better and more well-rounded leader. And also potentially, like I know one district, for example, the superintendent had 3 assistant superintendents. And so once a quarter, one of those 3 superintendents served as the superintendent for the board meeting that month. So that meant that that assistant superintendent had to prepare the agenda, had to go through the agenda prep with all of the staff members and the board members, and had to sit at the dais acting in essence as the superintendent that night at the board meeting. Now the full-time superintendent was in the audience in case that person was needed, but each quarter a different district leader took over the role of superintendent for a board meeting. What that did is it exposed 3 leaders in the district to the entire process that they may not have been exposed to had they not been responsible for that up until then, and that superintendent stayed in the district for probably 5 years. So these leaders had, over the course of 5 years, 5 opportunities to go through that exercise. It showed the commitment by the sitting superintendent to developing leaders, and it showed the commitment by the board to want to continue to develop leaders internally, which is one of the things that high-ranking leaders in a district look for. If they don't feel as though there's going to be any opportunity for them to raise in the ranks within a district, they're going to start looking outside the district, and you're going to lose very valuable leaders that you've probably as a district invested in. So there are ways to message from the dais, the board, that investing in leaders is important and that you believe in succession planning as a matter of practice. Now, Ms. Slough mentioned that you have honest conversation. If you start talking about succession planning from day one, and it's honest and it's sincere and it's transparent, number one, it builds trust, but number two, because you're talking about it from the beginning, it shouldn't be misinterpreted as this is to push you out. What it is exactly what Dr. Wortham mentioned, which is protection of the legacy and continuation of the goals of the district. And if you believe in those goals, which if it's your mission, if it's your vision, you ought to be believing in those goals, then you want to continue with those goals. Beyond that, when we start talking about the practicalities, the first thing that I would always recommend is that they reach out to their state school board association. And typically what the state school board associations will do is come to the district. Somebody from the state school board association would come to the district and basically have a full conversation where here are the options that you have now that you're looking at a superintendent. Do you want to look internally? Do you want to look externally? What kind of person are you looking for? How much community involvement do you want? What is the salary? Are you willing to adjust the salary? What are the benefits? There's some very targeted conversations that the State School Board Association can lead a board through. And in some cases, I know in Florida, when we do that, they come to the conclusion that the person they want is down the hall in that office, and they don't even necessarily have to launch a search. And there are times when they hire us as their state association to do the search with and for them. And then there are times when they may even, because Florida has some really large school districts, and some of those really large school districts like to hire some of the national headhunter type firms. And all of those options, the board needs to have a full understanding of what's involved in them, and really the best people that can help facilitate that conversation are right there in their state associations.
Thank you so much for that. That was a super helpful kind of step-by-step, so thank you for sharing that. And Ms. Lau, I'd like to talk with you briefly a little bit on the same topic, but also adding one additional piece. We have a couple questions that came in from the audience that are really sort of focused on this issue of the open and transparent communication between the superintendent and the school board. And sort of focusing on, kind of the same question I just asked Ms. Messina about, tools and specific best practices that you would recommend to those that are joining, especially since you've been through this a couple of times. What are some ways that you can kind of help to ensure a culture of transparency and good, strong, open communication between the board and the superintendent? And then what do you do if that starts to erode? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I'm glad that I got this question, because the thing that I value most in my relationship with the superintendent and with staff, and actually with my colleagues on the school board, is open, transparent trust, and especially information sharing. I think if it's made plain to all parties, the superintendent and the rest of the board, that we never want to be surprised when we sit at the board table. And not only that, we never want to be surprised by a phone call or an irate parent. I think that information flow, the superintendent never needs to let a board member be broadsided, and a board member never needs to let a superintendent be broadsided. I extend that down to the principals that I represent in my particular district as well. I believe that if we can create that culture of trust and open communication, we can keep focused on the academic advancement of our children and not be caught up in drama and things that detract from that academic achievement of our kids. I think that sometimes trust gets eroded because of this very thing. People intentionally or unintentionally leave out very basic pieces of information that other parties need to know in order to do their jobs effectively. And when that happens, the next time the person who was left in the dark doesn't know that he or she can trust the person who left them there. So I have conversation frequently with my superintendent. Please don't ever let me be surprised. Please just tell me. I don't care if the news is bad or good. Let me know so that I'm prepared if I start getting phone calls and emails from my constituents, and I can support you if I understand the position you're coming from. So I think it's very important that that open, honest communication and be held in highest regard, and also that trust be preserved at every opportunity.
Thank you so much for that. And I wonder if I could just ask a very quick follow-up question. I know both you and Ms. Messina have talked about the importance of the transparency, particularly because in the state of Florida, the sunshine laws are so very strict, in particular in terms of disclosing to the public. And so I just wondered if you could share with the audience any specific strategies you've found work really well in keeping the lines of communication open with the community as you go through the process of succession planning, search, and hiring?
Oh, I think that's an excellent question. If in the process of changing leaders like that, the community very much wants to be involved, especially when they highly value the education system in their community, which is the case here where I live. So when we're doing a superintendent search, for example, we always have a citizens committee that helps us do that. And it's comprised of community leaders, parents, some staff, and they are privy to all of the applicants and applications that come to us. And they then use that information to speak with their sphere of interest in order to bring back the very focus that our community wants in a new leader. The board is not bound by the work of that group, although they present to us a short list, but we're not bound by it. However, we take it very, very seriously, and in my experience, we've always selected from their short list. And I think that builds trust within the community as well when they see, oh yes, this board is not being completely independent, but rather they're seeking our input and actually acting on it.
Thank you so much for that. That's very helpful. Dr. Wortham, I wanted to come back to you and kind of stay on this same theme of building trust and transparency and open communication. We've got a couple questions from folks in the audience about maybe some concerns that in their particular context, they wonder, are they getting the full picture from the superintendent? Can we trust what we're hearing? Do they have some particular way of filtering things just to make it look a certain way for the board? And, I know that those concerns can sometimes come up. I'd love to just kind of hear your thoughts about that from the superintendent perspective. How do you help your board really understand that what you're communicating can be trusted and should be trusted and build that feeling of mutual respect and trust? What are your thoughts?
Well, we know that school districts work best when or through the coordinated efforts of the board and the superintendent. And building that relationship, there should not be a level of mistrust. When you speak, the assumption is, or the knowledge is, that you are sharing the truth. So sometimes board members get information from other staff members other than the superintendent. And I ask my board to please, if there's information that you need, please get it from me. Because sometimes the superintendent may not be aware of other information that's being given to the board. So when you operate in that manner, then you can fact find and know what the board is hearing and what they're receiving. And then the board, because of the relationship, can trust that what you are saying is the absolute truth. And I heard the other panelists say that someone else's experience might not be able to provide the information in total. So when the board receives information only from the superintendent, then that information can, that articulation and communication, collaboration is seamless when other people are not entering into the conversation with a different opinion.
I think that's incredibly valuable insight, and I'd love to ask you to follow up with, we have time for just one more question here, and I'm going to kind of end on this one, which is what's really the impact on the relationship when the board is kind of split in its understanding of the role of the board and board members versus the superintendent. And I, in particular, when there's kind of this split on the board where some board members think that they need to have a more active hand in what would really kind of be called management as opposed to governance. And then those that really understand the governance role and don't think that's appropriate. Do you have any, just last minute guidance or counsel to those that serve on boards where there's that split?
Yeah, you always, no matter how many members you have on the board, if it's a 9-member board, superintendents can count very well. Always go for the 6. And you always must know that you have, it's our role to make sure that the board in total understands the components of each issue. My phrase is united we stand, divided we fall. And we have to develop that productive partnership in working together. Our kids won't benefit, they won't succeed if there is division on the board, if there's division, as someone else said, with the principals, if there is fragmentation along the lines, it will not work. In my heart, I keep pictures of children throughout my office and central office because I want to always be reminded, this decision, this behavior, is it good for kids?
Thank you so much for that. And on that note, we're going to need to end. So we are at the end of our time, and I want to just take a moment and thank so much Andrew Messina, Bev Slough, and Dr. Deborah Wortham for taking the time to do this, Heather Dean from NSBA, and my colleague Amanda Finney for making sure that this session went so well, and to all of you who listened in and asked so many terrific questions that we really didn't have time to get to probably half of them. So we will certainly do our homework and try to provide some good written responses and get that back out to everybody. But thank you so much. I think this was an important conversation. I'm delighted that we had an opportunity to do it. And once again, thank you so much for your participation and have a wonderful day.